and there's two pots. There's a pot for the men who are sitting inside the arbor, and there's a pot for the women and children on the east side, outside the arbors. So once that's done, the women and the children will stop what they're doing. They'll line up outside the ring on the east side. The men will take turns on the inside of the ring, taking medicine. Drink it, splashing on yourself. At 2 o'clock in the morning when it's hot and you're tired, that splashing it on yourself really helps jolt you awake. So you take medicine. And at that time, when you take medicine, I'm not sure about the women, I've never really asked, but I know for a fact that at that time, the men after the medicine are fasting until dinner that night. You can't eat anything. You can have water, you can have coffee or tea, no sugar, no cream. I didn't drink black coffee until I started going to Cherokee ceremonial grounds. But like I said, 2 o'clock in the morning, you're tired, you don't care what it tastes like, then you just know that you need the caffeine that's in it. And so sometimes of the year there's afternoon ceremonies, especially during our New Year's ceremony, our green corn ceremony. There's a couple of dances in the afternoon. You have other things that you have to do. So basically, if you don't have anything else you have to do, you kind of rest, relax, talk to people. And then right before dinner time, the men go back into the arbor. Of course, the fire is lit the whole time. That's one thing I forgot is when you, after you clean the ring, the fire is lit. So you go back in the ring, you take medicine again, everybody does, and then they do what's called feeding the fire. Now, I'll tell a story of my grandma. Like I said, my grandma was white. My mom's mom was white. She was born in Pennsylvania. She grew up in California. At 17, she moved to Tahlequah. She went her senior year to Tahlequah High School. She graduated and married my grandpa on the same day. So she was fresh from California. My grandpa was a Cherokee guy from Caney community out toward Welling, which is close to Tahlequah. You don't know where Welling's at, you don't know where Caney's at, most people don't. So he was from Caney, and there was a stomp ground close to Caney. It was called Sugar Mountain. And so my grandpa invited my grandma, probably when they were dating, to go to stomp ground with him. She went one time. She was super scared. And so I grew up with her stories. My grandpa died when I was young. So I grew up with her stories of the stomp ground and being really scared. And she said, in hushed tones, of course, she said, they put a live chicken in the fire. And I was like, whatever, Grandma. I didn't believe that. You know, my grandma told me things about seeing UFOs, and all kinds of different things. And I kind of actually believed her on the UFO thing, but she said they put a live chicken in the fire and it's white. And of course, to her, that meant they didn't like white people. She thought it was directed, right at her. And so,
Scottish grandma?
yes, she was white. And so I got to going to Cherokee ceremonial grounds, and I found out she was right. There are some Cherokee ceremonial grounds that feed the fire with a chicken. I don't know if it's alive or dead. They may wring its neck, let them bring it up there. But they always have its head tucked underneath its wing. And if you tuck a chicken's head underneath its wing, it'll go to sleep. I don't know if it's asleep or it's dead, but they do put it in the fire. I've actually seen pictures depicting this in books, and I've seen it myself. But not at the ceremonial ground that I went to. The way that they feed the fire is they would go, the diktia, or in the church we would call them the deacons. They're the people at the ceremonial ground that make sure everything goes right, make sure nobody's breaking the rules, all that sort of stuff. They carry sticks. But they would go around to each camp with a brown paper bag, and they would get some of every food item at the camp. They bring it in, the firekeeper will lift the log off the fire, they'll set it in there, and they feed the fire. And you sit there in those arbors after you've been fasting all day and wait until that food is completely consumed. And then you can go eat. And so then you eat dinner. Everybody eats dinner, you rest up, you get dressed, you prepare for that night's dance. The dance begins when they can see the first star in the east. That represents it being dark. And so there's 3 calls for the people to come into the dance ring. The men, at that third call, the men are all supposed to be inside the arbors. The women and everybody else sits around the outside of the ring. Now the ring is delineated usually by a mound of dirt. It can be this tall, or it can be this tall, depending on how old the stomp ground is, because when you clear out that ring, you push everything to the side and you put it on that mound. And so everybody else sits on the outside of that mound. Women who are shaking shells will sit with the guys who they're going to shake shells for. Women whose men are inside the ring will sit close to those arbors, so that when it's their husband or uncle or whoever's turn it is to lead, they can follow them in. So the dance goes on all night long. There's 2 dances at the Cherokee ceremonial ground that have to be done. Every man has his own songs, his own style of leading, and they can do basically whatever they want within limits. But there's 2 dances that have to be done. The first dance that has to be done is called the friendship dance. And sometimes you'll see this done at Cherokee Nation events, but it's a welcoming dance, basically. The first half, or the first part of the friendship dance, is for people, members of that ground, or people who are sitting inside the ring only. So they do that, and then they'll do a stomp dance. And what that friendship dance does is it welcomes everybody else inside to dance. And so they'll do the friendship dance, and that leader will usually do one of his own songs and dances, and then they sit down. And the rest of the night, it's leaders from different grounds, different places who come in to visit. It can be a really, really long night if there's not very many people there, because people start having to leave multiple times and get tired, and may or may not take several breaks to get coffee. And you can still drink coffee and stuff. I forgot to say after dinner, no food again until things over. So dance all night. The dance ends when you can see the sun coming up in the east, and it always ends with a dance called the Old Timers Dance. And the Old Timers Dance is a dance that invites the people who are from that ground who have passed on to come in and dance. And it's after you've been up all night, you're tired, you're emotional, it's one of the most powerful, dances, because you can literally, even if you believe in that stuff or not, you can literally feel people watching, that you can't see this old time dance. So, most grounds will, on Sunday morning, they'll go to water, they'll play stickball or do something that's communal, and then pack up, clean up, and get ready for the next one. For people like me, this is another Brad Wagnon take on things. For people like me who grew up in Baptist churches, a lot of times I would get done at the stomp grounds and I would drive directly to my home church and attend a church service. I have found nothing within either spiritual practice that denies the other. For me, the stomp grounds are more of a cultural thing, and my mom, of course, being my mom, being concerned about me, it's like, who are they praying to out there? The stomp ground. I said, I don't know who they're praying to, but I know who I'm praying to. And so that's all that matters to me. And so that's my take on the ceremonial grounds.
What is the most active, in eastern Oklahoma, the most active stump grounds?
Stokes ground, Redbird ground, Echota, ceremonial ground. Echota is one that I went to the most. It's a Four Mothers ground, so it's a little bit different from the rest of them. Long Valley, Squirrel Ridge, Flint. There's one or two more.
And the actual stomp dance is always on Saturday. They bring you on Saturday night.
99.9% of the time. Now, some stomp grounds will have a dance on Redbird Smith's birthday, which is July 19th. So that might not be on Saturday, may be on Saturday. And they usually have a dance Cherokee National Holiday, no matter what their schedule is, and that's usually a dance where they invite everybody in. And that's usually on Saturday night, but that's just because the holiday's on the weekend. These ceremonial grounds, like I said, they're out. A lot of them are out in the middle of nowhere. You pretty much, to most of them, have to be invited to come because you're not going to find it any other way. But there are a couple. I know Echota for a fact because I've been there a lot. Is very accepting of people coming in and watching and even participating. One of the unspoken rules, of course, are just common sense, don't cause trouble. But one of the other rules is you're not supposed to have been partaking in drugs or alcohol prior to coming. You're not supposed to be under the effects of any substance. And that's what those, among other things, that's what those big Tia guys are for, is kicking people out, I think, too. But if you're not making trouble, if you're not doing those sorts of things, most people are allowed to come and sit and watch and even participate. So yeah, that's a typical ceremonial ground weekend. So we'll talk a little bit about people, people's roles in Cherokee society, people's responsibilities. We're getting close to the end of this. I've been talking for a little bit over an hour. In Wichita, the first time I did this after COVID, I talked for an hour and a half and I didn't even realize that any time went by. So I keep track of the time. I know we've got a little bit of time here, and I know we got to eat and stuff, so I'll finish up here in just a bit. Grandmothers. Like I said, if there was anybody in Cherokee society that was valued over anybody else, it was our elders, and particularly our grandmothers. Now, a grandmother in Cherokee society didn't necessarily have to even really be a grandmother. There were an elder woman of that clan. They could be a great aunt. They could be an aunt, something like that. So the elder women of your clan knew everything, did everything. People had the utmost respect for them. They had the final say in a lot of things. And they were beloved. They took care of everything for people from birth to death. Naming, we'll talk about naming here in just a little bit. They knew which plants to gather when you were sick, which things to do for you when you were sick. And they were the holders of our spiritual knowledge. Our elders, even our men, to some extent, were the same thing. They were the wisest. They were valued. They were consulted on everything. Don't take a picture too close because there's a typo in there. I misspelled this Cherokee word. It's actually Kali, K-A-L-I, which means full. Elders were considered to be fully human. They went through all those experiences, and the rest of us were just working to that. Anybody know what Kali means in Cherokee? K-E-L-I? It's a raccoon. Typo there. So the children had roles and responsibilities. They helped their mothers in the garden, mostly is what their role was. Cherokee boys would use blowguns, keep the birds and the squirrels and all that stuff from eating the crops. But their main role was to learn. It was to connect with their elders, to learn from their elders, and basically be raised in the Cherokee way by their elders. Men. First of all, look at the way this guy's dressed. Cherokee men were the flashy ones. Cherokee men were the ones that wore jewelry, bright colors. You can see this guy is wearing red. He's wearing copper jewelry. He's got a feather on his head. I like to think it was because that's what they saw in nature. You know how birds, the males are the flashy ones, the females are usually some gray or brown color. So the men dressed up. They were hunters, warriors, teachers. When they hunted, they gave thanks and prayers and offerings for the life taken. There came a point in time when they stopped doing this so much. And if you know anything about Cherokee society or Cherokee stories, there's a story called The Origin of Disease and Medicine, and that's how disease came to the world. Because we weren't thanking, we weren't being grateful for the lives we were taking of the animals. There were warriors. Now this isn't to say that Cherokee women couldn't be warriors, couldn't be hunters, but it was the man's responsibility to provide meat for his family and to protect his family. They prepared for wars with purification rituals. They painted their faces and their bodies. This is a good point to talk a little bit about colors in Cherokee society. Like I said before, white represented purity, so they would paint their bodies sometimes with the color white to represent that they had purified themselves before the battle. They would paint themselves with the color red. And a lot of people say red represents war. Well, it really doesn't. It represents a true or just cause. And so they painted themselves with red to show that they believed in this cause that they were fighting for. And then, of course, they painted themselves with black paint. And black represents exactly what everybody thinks it represents, which is death. And they painted themselves with black to show that they were not scared to die for this cause that they were fighting for. They also helped prepare the gardens for the women. They did this in physical ways like plowing, and they also did this in spiritual ways like ceremony. The ceremonial schedule for Cherokee people before contact, and I'm basically planting season to harvesting season. The easier way to explain it is with our Roman calendar. It's basically April to October. And so some Cherokee stomping grounds only dance April to October. Some dance year-round. So they helped in the gardens with the ceremonial practices. Women took care of the homes, and not because the men told them to. It was because they owned the homes. They owned everything in the home. When a Cherokee man got married, he moved in with his wife. If there wasn't a home already prepared for them, they moved in with his wife's family, and then they would build homes, plural, too. They'd build a winter house and a summer house close to her family. So the man left his family, and he moved in with the wife's family. She owned the home. That interests a bit. Gardens, they were responsible, like the men were responsible for bringing the meat, the women were responsible for the gardens. Now, this wasn't because Cherokee men were lazy. This was because Cherokee people recognized that women had the power to give life. And so it was only fitting that they were the ones who brought life from the earth. Took care of the children. That was really a responsibility of everybody, but they did take care of their own children. There were community advisors, government, spiritual leaders. They were involved, if not officially, they were always consulted about large decisions. The men were the ones who were, for lack of a better term, government leaders, but the women were the consultants. They're the ones that told them what to do. And in the ceremony, they carried the rhythm. We've already talked about that with the turtle shells. A little note on medicine people. There's not very many Cherokee medicine people left. Be very careful with anybody who tells you they're a Cherokee medicine person, especially if they want to charge you money. Be really careful of that. There are a few Cherokee medicine people left, and most of them, of course, are in northeastern Oklahoma and in North Carolina. There's a lot of people who know a little bit. And you know what happens when you know a little bit and you try to practice something. You know enough to get yourself and other people hurt. So don't dabble in that unless you know. Don't dabble with people that dabble in that unless you know that they are actually legitimate. Messengers and helpers, we do believe. We talked about in Acts 1:19, we talked about the provider, the creator. We do believe in other spiritual beings, if you will. We believe birds are messengers. Some birds get bad rap, like owls. It's not necessarily the owls or the birds that are bad, even though the message they might be carrying is bad. Ani and Dalloway. The only way that I can think of to describe these, and I can think of other ways, but the most common way I can think of describing this is like angels. Spiritual beings that live both in some other plane and can come into our plane. The Ani and Dalloway are called the wise ones. You'll hear them referenced in Cherokee prayers, and usually have something to do with different types of people, like white people, black people, Asian people, in different directions sometimes in Cherokee prayers. We do believe in other spirits, guardians. Medicine people are messengers. It's funny because Crosland Smith doesn't use social media, but his son does. And sometimes I'll wake up in the morning with a message from Stokes saying, "My dad said to tell you this." And so I always take those very seriously. So medicine people are messengers as well. Our ancestors, whether you are on that side that believes that you can actually talk to your ancestors, or whether on this side that believes you can learn from the things that your ancestors did or didn't do, our ancestors are messengers. In the spirit of the Creator within. You can call that whatever you want to call it. You can call it your spirit, you can call it your conscience, you can call it your voice, whatever. There is that thing within us. If you've ever heard the Cherokee prayer that Donnie does, that was given to us again by Benny Smith, that prays in the 7 directions, one of those directions is inward. And it talks about the spirit of the Creator within us. It tells us what we're supposed to be doing. It's that voice in your head that tells you shouldn't do that, or tells you to, go talk to somebody in particular or something. Things like that do happen. So, you guys mind if I sit down? No. My back is hurting. My doctor tells me it's because I need to lose weight. I tell her she's wrong. It was a bad. I slept. That's what it was. So naming ceremonies. One of the we have a public email for CCO. It's cco@cherokee.org. Ever since that email has been published on the Cherokee Nation website, we get all kinds of questions. I don't want to say crazy questions. There's no bad question. Just bad people asking. But anyway, one of the questions we get all the time are about Cherokee names. And we get this in person too. And I'm like, you're 40, you're not Cherokee, you don't get a Cherokee name. But anyway, there were legitimate Cherokee naming ceremonies for kids, and most of the time they happened within 4 days of the child being born. The family would go to water, they would come back, and the grandmother or the mother or the great-grandmother, the eldest woman in that family would give the child a name. That's basically the only Cherokee naming ceremony that I know of. Naming ceremonies are kind of like medicine men. If somebody wants to charge you for giving you a Cherokee name, probably not legit. Child rearing practices. This is where I was going to get into responsibilities of men and women. So this goes along with the Cherokee clan system. So Cherokee people are matrilineal people, which means we get our clans from our mothers. So all the kids born to a father and a mother would be of that mother's clan. Therefore, their father would be of a different clan. So any clan-specific knowledge would either be passed to them by their mother or by their uncle, their mother's brother, because he would have been of the same clan. So the uncle in Cherokee society had a lot of responsibility for his sister's kids, especially the boys, on how to teach them to be Cherokee men. For the most part, it was the mother and the women in the clan that taught the girls how to be Cherokee women. And so the father of that family would have responsibility to his sister's kids. And so that it was kind of a little bit, of course he was the father, but I almost kind of think it's better the way we do things today, because that frees the father up to be the father and not the disciplinarian, and it just frees him up to have fun with the kids or whatever. So it was a little bit different dynamic in Cherokee society as far as raising children. Of course, like I said before, it was the responsibility of the entire community to raise the kids, and you see that a lot with people, dying of disease, or men dying in warfare, things like that. You see that communal aspect of raising kids. Wedding ceremonies and divorce ceremonies. There are Cherokee wedding ceremonies. There are people within the Cherokee Nation today that are ordained or allowed to marry people, but a Cherokee marriage ceremony usually took place at a ceremonial ground. And it was done by either the chief of the ceremonial ground or the medicine person of the ceremonial ground. Real simple ceremony, always includes food. And so I've had the opportunity to go to a couple of those. I added the wife and the husband translation just because I think they're funny. The translation for wife in Cherokee is the person that cooks for me, and the translation of husband in Cherokee is the person that just lives with me. So, and that is shown in the ceremony for the divorce, which was no ceremony at all. Very unceremoniously, the wife could place her husband's items on the front porch, the front lawn, and when he came home, he knew that he was not supposed to come there anymore. So either he moved back in with his family. So the only thing that Cherokee men actually owned were their hunting tools, their flint knapping tools, their bows, their arrows, their knives. They had a war club or blowgun or whatever. They owned those things. They might own their clothes. Women, their wives probably made them for them, so I guess it was up to the wife whether they want to put a change of clothes outside of them for them or not. They might just be stuck in whatever they're wearing that day. Another interesting thing that somebody brought up last weekend is that Cherokee men were traditionally the ones that wore the woven belts. And women would mark their husbands with these belts. They had a particular pattern, the colors that they would use in their belts. And so I started to wonder, and somebody else brought up the question, did they get the belts? Did they get to take the belts with them? Probably not, because they were no longer belonging to that woman, so she probably kept it. Traditional games as ceremony. Today we have a stickball game that is mostly social. They do play it at ceremonial games. It's men versus women. Men use the sticks. Women use their hands. There's one pole in the center with a target on the top. And it's usually fish or a round wooden ball. And points are scored by hitting the target, hitting certain parts of the pole, depending on where you're playing. The rules are a little bit different. But points are scored by hitting that pole or that target. Our old game, and a game that's still played in the Eastern Band, on the Eastern Band Reservation, is Ani Jolti, which is the little brother of war. Ani Jol actually means to struggle or to wrestle. You will make fun of the way I say wrestle, but I don't know how the correct way to say it is. other than what I say, but it means to struggle or to wrestle. It was used as an alternative to war. It was used ceremonially. So if two Cherokee towns or the Cherokee tribe and another tribe had a disagreement, most of the time those disagreements were on territory, usually hunting territory, then they could go to war. They could attack each other and kill, how many ever, 20, 30 men, or they could play a stickball game. And men did die during stickball games, but it was usually only, one or two. One or two might get, injured, maimed, or whatever. But it was better than 30 or 40 people being killed in a battle and, villages being burned and all that sorts of things. So they could play a stickball game as an alternative to war, conflict resolution. And that game was played with two goals. Most commonly, the goal would be two willow sticks or two willow saplings on one end of the long field and two on the other, kind of like a football field. Of course, it didn't have markings or anything on it, but just a big field with a goal on each end. And in order to score points, you had to run through that goal with the ball and then run around one of the poles to the other side. And like I said, it was blood sport. It could be deadly. But one of the rules is that the teams were evenly divided. And so you had a guy across the field from you. They were usually matched up by like size and speed, things like that. But you had a guy across the field from you that you were matched up with. If that guy was no longer able to play in the game, whether he was injured or killed or whatever, then you weren't either. You had to come out too. So that kind of said you didn't really want to hurt the guy really bad unless you had to, because you couldn't play with either. So that's stickball. On the sticks, there's a picture down there. The sticks look like small versions of lacrosse sticks. A curve on the end with netting, and then the balls. The Cherokee balls are usually about this big or maybe a little bit smaller. They look like they're stitched together, kind of almost like baseballs, where sometimes they'll have a pinch at the top of four corners and stitched together. Choctaw style balls are strips of leather that are woven. Those tend to hold up a little bit better. I like those a little bit better than the Cherokee style. They tend to bust open sometimes, but that's how that game was played. So just a couple more slides here. There are several prophecies in Cherokee spirituality and Cherokee culture. One of those prophecies that I usually mentioned earlier is a prophecy that says when the turtles stop singing, then our culture, our spirituality will be no more, it won't exist anymore. And that's referencing those turtle shell shackles that the women wear during our stomp dance. And most people, that probably means nothing. But if you go to a Cherokee ceremonial ground, or at least certain Cherokee ceremonial grounds, I'm not disparaging one or the other, but you will see women wearing cans instead of turtle shell shackles. Cans are usually little condensed milk cans with holes poked in them. The turtle shell shackles have river rocks in them, so do the cans. But they are an easier way to make the rhythm than by finding or killing turtles. And so a lot of women no longer wear turtles. And so when you start to think about that prophecy tends to make more sense. When the turtles don't sing, then our culture will not exist. And going to that, the next prophecy is that when we are close to losing everything, if we are right, we will get it all back. Now, there's a ton of things in this prophecy. The first being, there's been several times just in the 20 or 30 years that I've really studied the Cherokee culture that I thought we were close to losing everything. Our language is the main thing that I think of. We have less than now 2,000 Cherokee speakers, first language Cherokee speakers, out of 450,000 citizens. So it's close to being gone. There's major efforts to not let that happen. Cherokee Nation is putting millions of dollars into new facilities, new programs for language. I know the chief's going to be out here like in November, but I'm going to steal a little bit of his thunder and say they are going to start offering in-person Cherokee language classes to at-large communities. They're hiring people. They've got job listings out now for that. And so you're gonna get a language presentation or a week-long language class maybe like this, where somebody from the Cherokee Nation comes and teaches that. So there are major efforts being done to save our language. I actually think our ceremonial grounds are probably the strongest that they've ever been. There's probably more Cherokee people going to ceremonial grounds than there has been in the past 50 years right now, and so I think those are pretty strong. But again, if we lose our language, those things aren't necessarily Cherokee anymore. We can't do our medicine, we can't do our talks in Cherokee. And the next part, if we are right, that's not saying that if this prophecy is right. That's saying if we are living in the correct way, we'll get it all back. So in that way that do you touch. The next one is we are to return home. And I included this one because, of course, I like to give an invitation to everybody to come back to Tahlequah or to northeastern Oklahoma. That might be what you consider home, the community that you're from in Oklahoma. For me, northeastern Oklahoma, the Cherokee Reservation, Tahlequah is definitely home. But what I think of going back home, I think of going back to our homeland in the southeastern United States. I think of visiting all those historical sites that our ancestors were from. Catula. I took a couple of. We went to Atlanta for an at-large event a couple months ago, and so I took on the way back, I took a couple of my staff that has never been to our homeland through some of the historical sites. I took them to Catula, I took them to Clemens Dome, took them to Red Clay, and it was a very great experience for them. Those are three sites that I would definitely say anybody that goes out with Cherokee needs to see, but there's hundreds more. So that's what returning home means to me. And somebody at a presentation, I believe it was in Wichita, Josh, who's a Cherokee speaker and teaches their language classes up there, he said to him that going home meant to go back to where things began, go back to the fire. And it makes sense because in our ceremonies, our New Year's ceremonies, green corn ceremonies, the fire in the center of the ceremonial grounds is snuffed out. And it would have been the same in Cherokee communities. The fire was snuffed out. The fire was relit in the ceremony. All the fires in the houses or all in the ceremonial grounds, all the fires in the camps are snuffed out. And then the fire in the center is relit. And coals from that fire are taken around to each home or each camp, and the fire is relit. So we are to return home. So what remains today? What can we still practice? If you come to northeastern Oklahoma, you can go to a ceremonial ground. You can participate in that. You can watch that. So that definitely still remains. Our games still remain. Our language still remains. You can definitely participate in those things. But being here, separated by distance from the Cherokee Nation, the main thing that people can practice anywhere is those values. You can, be kind to one another. You can help one another anywhere that you are. You can help your group, your valued son Cherokees. You can help, the community that you live in. You can practice those values anywhere you live, and so the main thing that I want to get across in these presentations. Like I said, they're mostly educational, but here at the end I get a little bit sappy. Yeah, you can practice those values, and if we live in that way, just like that prophecy said, it'll all return to us. And I want to end with this. This is the most basic thing. It's a really simple sentence, but it's really hard to do. We are supposed to be happy as Cherokee people. We're supposed to be happy that we are Cherokee. We're supposed to be happy that we're still here. We're supposed to be happy that we can still gather together like this. You will not find a happier place or a louder place than a room with Cherokee speakers in it, because they're going to laugh a lot. Everything's funnier in Cherokee. It just is. And so we are to be happy. And that's from Crosland, and that's, like I said, it's one of the simplest things to say, probably one of the hardest things to do. So, that's it. That's me. Thank you. So you can keep up with us if you use social media. I know Facebook is for old people. I'm one of those old people. You can keep up with us on Facebook. Cherokee Nation does have an Instagram page. Cherokee Nation does now have a TikTok page. I have a TikTok. I don't know how to use it, but I do have one. Cherokee Nation does as well. So at my presentation in Austin, a bunch of people showed up from another tribal group, just simply because they had seen somebody posted on Instagram that the meeting was going to happen. And so that's my contact information, my email, all that kind of stuff. But we announced pretty much everything on Facebook. If you're interested, our conference is next weekend. It is virtual. If you haven't signed up yet and you want to, it's cnccconference.org. The registration page is right there on the front page, and you can register in that same address. The past couple of years we've had trouble with people logging in and all that kind of stuff. There's no login. You just type in cnccconference.org, and you go to the sessions tab, and you'll be able to click on the sessions that you want to go to, and it'll bring up the video. So that's next Saturday from 10 to like 7 or 8. We did that for y'all, for these people on the West Coast, because we started at 8, and it's like 6 o'clock in the morning for y'all. And so it's 10 our time, so 8 your time. We're going to try that.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Very good.
This is a thank you from us.
Oh, thank you
for coming out.
My wife will love that.
It's one of those played on the ground.
Yeah. She's real big into being outside. She always asks me when I come here if I'm going to do this or do that. This morning she said, "Oh, you can take an ATV ride in the desert." And I'm like, you want me to ride in the desert on a, we call it four-wheeler back home. You want me to ride in the four-wheeler on a desert? I said, "I think you want me to get lost." Because last time she was asking me if I was going to go hiking, and I'm like, it's 110 degrees. I'm not sure.
Come in wintertime.
Okay.
Before we break for food, does everyone have a blue ticket?